Getting into Nuosu Tech Towers was like gaining entry into a sacred palace. The company was the beating heart of Lagos's tech industry, prestigious, competitive, and nearly impossible to infiltrate unless you had top-tier connections, a perfect resume, or raw, undeniable brilliance. Wendy Osiji had none of those. What she did have was desperation, determination, and a prayer on her lips. Her mother had been in and out of the hospital for over a year, and the bills had drained them dry. The pharmacy credit line had stopped. The landlord was already eyeing their apartment like a hawk waiting to pounce. This job wasn't about a paycheck. It was her lifeline. Wendy stood outside the building, gripping her modest brown leather folder and adjusting the borrowed blazer that hung slightly loose on her slim frame. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered, "God, please. I don't want luxury. I just want enough. Let this be enough." Inside, the building gleamed, glass, steel, and prestige woven into every corner. The receptionists looked like models, the employees moved like clockwork, and Wendy felt like a fish in a tank of sharks. Still, she reminded herself, she was good at what she did, a first-class graduate, organized, smart, quick under pressure. But then there was Vander Chukanwosu. She had heard the stories, the arrogant billionaire CEO with a sharp tongue and no patience for mistakes. He didn't smile, didn't joke, didn't tolerate mediocrity. People whispered about how cold he was, how many assistants had left in tears, how no secretary ever lasted more than a month. When it was finally her turn, her heart nearly stopped. She walked into his sleek, dark-paneled office, heart pounding. Vander didn't look up from his laptop. His voice came low and dismissive. "Tell me something about yourself that's not on your CV." Wendy paused. Most people might have flinched, but not her. Her voice was steady. "I don't crack under pressure, sir, and I'm very good at working with difficult people." His fingers paused on the keyboard. That made him look up, his dark eyes locked onto hers, steady, confident, and beautiful. He didn't expect that. She wasn't flustered or fawning. She was composed, calm. There was something in her that intrigued him. He reached out. "Your CV." She handed it over without a word. He scanned it, slightly impressed. First class, fluent in 2 languages, tech-savvy, highly organized. And yet she wasn't just a brain. She was striking. Quiet strength in a soft-spoken voice. Gorgeous in a simple, unforced way. Vander leaned back in his chair, then looked at her again. "Report tomorrow at 7 a.m. sharp. I don't tolerate lateness, Miss Osiji. You'll start on a 1-month probation." For a second, Wendy thought she heard wrong. Her eyes widened. "Sir, I got the job?" He raised a brow. "You heard me." The moment she stepped out of his office, Wendy's eyes filled with tears. Not the sad kind, the grateful kind. She clasped her hands together and whispered, "Thank you, God. You heard me. You really heard me." For the first time in a long while, hope bloomed in her chest. This job could change everything. Wendy Osiji couldn't wait to get home. Her feet barely touched the ground as she left Mosu Tech Towers. For a moment, she forgot the weight of Lagos traffic, the sweat clinging to her back, and the fear that had gripped her heart all morning. All she could think about was telling her mother the good news. That finally, after all the long nights and unanswered job applications, something had worked in her favor. She got down from the bus and practically ran the rest of the way home. The small 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of Surulere wasn't much, but it was home, and the woman waiting behind the door was everything. "Mom!" she called out as she entered, breathless. Her mother, who had been sitting on the worn-out sofa with a blanket over her knees, looked up, startled. "Wendy, you're back so soon." Wendy threw her bag on the table and rushed over. "I got it. Mom, I got the job. Nuosu Tech actually hired me. I start tomorrow." For a moment, her mother stared at her, wide-eyed, and then she let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a cry. She wrapped Wendy in a tight hug, shaking slightly with joy. "Oh, Wendy, my child, that's incredible. I am so proud of you." Wendy closed her eyes in the embrace. At 24, her mother was her rock, her motivation, her reason to fight. After her father passed away shortly after she finished secondary school, it had been just the two of them against the world. No support, no family help, just resilience and faith. Her mother had done everything from cleaning houses to selling snacks in traffic, all so Wendy could go to school and have a chance at a better life. Now it was Wendy's turn to give back. "There'll finally be a proper salary coming in," Wendy said softly, pulling back. "No more skipping medication because we can't afford it. No more worrying about rent. I can't promise luxury, but at least we can live a modest life without fear." Her mother smiled, but behind her eyes there was worry. "It's a big company. Are you sure this job will treat you well?" Wendy hesitated. "The CEO, he's not the easiest person to work with. People say he's cold, rude, the type of man who doesn't think twice before making you feel small." Her mother frowned. "And you still want to work there?" "I have to," Wendy said, determined. "Even if it kills me, I have to. You've done everything for me. Now it's my turn to do something for you." The next morning, Wendy was up before the sun. She ironed her clothes twice, brushed her hair into a neat bun, and carefully packed her laptop and notepad. Her mother insisted she eat something before leaving, pushing a plate of toast and tea into her hands. "Promise me you won't skip meals now that you're working in a big office," her mother said. Wendy smiled. "I promise." She arrived at Mosu Tech Towers at 6:55 a.m., 5 minutes early. She was proud of herself. Until she realized Vander Chukanwosu was already in the office, she hadn't even dropped her bags before the intercom on her desk buzzed. "Miss Osiji, in my office, now." She exhaled, straightened her skirt, and walked in. Vander didn't look up from his desk as he spoke in that same cold tone. "I do not in any way tolerate my assistant arriving after me. If this happens again, you're gone. Get me coffee. Black." Wendy stood still, processing his words, then nodded once and turned to leave. There were no apologies, no excuses, no emotion, just grace. Back in his office, Vander paused. That was new. Most of his former assistants would have stuttered or tried to explain themselves. Some even argued, not her. She let him speak. She absorbed the sharpness in his tone like it was nothing and walked out with quiet dignity. That bothered him more than it should have. A few minutes later, she returned and gently placed a cup of steaming black coffee on his table. He took a sip. It was perfect. His eyes lifted slowly to look at her as she walked back to her desk, silent and composed. This woman wasn't like the others. She was too calm, too poised, too perfect. And for the first time in a long time, Vander Chukanwosu found himself intrigued. If perfection ever showed up in human form, Vander Chukanwosu was slowly starting to believe it had arrived wrapped in soft skin, high cheekbones, and quiet fire answering to the name Wendy Osiji. She didn't just do her job, she lived it. Every task he assigned was completed with unnerving precision. Every deadline met before the clock even ticked. Meetings were scheduled and followed up with seamless coordination, and she anticipated his needs with military-like sharpness. Most people needed to be reminded. Wendy, she anticipated. It was as if her brain was wired to function 3 steps ahead of his. He couldn't understand it. In his world, people fought to impress him, to gain recognition. They made noise. They boasted. They slipped up while trying too hard. But not her. Wendy worked in silence, with discipline and a type of grace he'd never seen before. She wasn't flashy, never gossiped, and kept her head down. But in that silence, she was moving mountains. She stayed late at night reviewing files, researching the latest tech innovations, and developing efficient workflows that saved the company money. She identified gaps in strategies his department heads had missed. And she didn't just fix problems. She offered solutions no one else had dared to think of. On her own initiative, she emailed a tech firm in South Africa proposing a partnership that had since evolved into a multimillionaire deal. Vander had stared at her email, stunned. She did this on her own? Every morning she came in early, always beating the traffic, always freshly dressed in simple but elegant outfits. Her desk was immaculate, her schedule flawless. She made his coffee perfectly. No sugar, no milk, just black and bold. Exactly the way he liked it. And when he barked orders, spoke coldly, or dismissed her efforts with a wave of his hand, she didn't react. She didn't protest. She didn't flinch. She would simply nod, accept the instruction, and walk away with her quiet, queen-like energy. No one had ever done that to him before. Not once. Not in all his years running this empire. And it was driving him insane. At home, Wendy allowed herself the small luxury of complaint. After dinner, she would sit beside her mother, take off her heels, and stretch her tired legs on the sofa. "He didn't even look at me today," she'd mutter. "I corrected a Billionaire error in a contract draft, and he didn't say a word. No thanks, nothing. Just send it to legal." Her mother, wise and warm despite her failing health, would smile softly and stroke her daughter's arm. "Wendy, not every good deed gets an applause. But heaven sees you. God blesses the work of our hands. Your reward will come. Just hold on." Wendy would nod, smile a little, but her heart felt heavier with each passing day. She had poured herself into this job, heart, body, soul, and yet the one person who should notice didn't. And worse, he was cruel. It had been over a month, a whole month of perfection, a month of sacrifice. And yet, Vander Nwosu hadn't once said the words, "Thank you." She didn't want praise, but appreciation. Just a little would have been nice. Still, Wendy woke up each morning and chose to fight. For her mother, for herself, for the dream of a better life, because she knew exactly what she had signed up for. She had seen the stories, heard the rumors. She knew what kind of man Vander was, and still she chose to stay. He could be dismissive, cold, unbothered, but she refused to let that change who she was. She had already survived worse. So if being the assistant to the most infuriating man in Lagos was the road to peace and purpose, then she would walk it barefoot if she had to. But what she didn't know was that behind the rude, expressionless mask, Vander was watching, listening, feeling, and something inside him had already started to shift. Monday mornings at Nwosu Tech Towers were always a blend of elegance and efficiency. Staff moved with practiced ease, meetings were stacked back to back, and the hum of productivity was in the air by 7 a.m. But today, something was different. Vander Nwosu sat behind his polished mahogany desk, scrolling through morning reports. His coffee sat untouched, growing colder by the minute. His eyes, however, kept drifting, not to his laptop, not to his phone, but to the small monitor on the corner of his desk connected to the building's internal CCTV system. And there she was, Wendy Osiji, always the first to arrive, always focused, always composed. Except not today. She sat behind her desk, shoulders hunched, her usual energy absent. The vibrant woman who handled deadlines like a machine, who always looked crisp and calm, now looked defeated. Her movements were slow, mechanical. Her posture was drooped. Her eyes, dull. There was no fire in them today. Vander frowned, confused. He'd never seen her like this. Ever. His first instinct was to ignore it. She was his assistant, not his concern. Whatever was going on in her personal life had nothing to do with him. But even as he told himself that, a strange tightness coiled in his chest. Still, pride had always been his defense mechanism, so when he buzzed her in to ask for the completed proposal he had assigned Friday, he expected her usual quiet efficiency. Instead, she walked in slowly, her notepad in hand, and stood in front of him looking smaller than usual. I didn't finish the task, sir," she said quietly. "There was a family emergency over the weekend. I tried to concentrate, but I couldn't. I'm really sorry. I'll finish it before lunch, even if it means skipping my break." For a moment, Vander didn't say a word. His gaze met hers, and in that second, something clenched in his stomach. Her voice was calm, respectful, but weighed down with something deeper: fatigue, worry, sorrow, and yet, "I do not tolerate incompetence, Miss Osiji," he said coolly, reverting to habit. "I want that file on my desk in 20 minutes. No excuses." Something shifted in her face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was disappointment. She blinked slowly, nodded, and whispered, "Yes, sir." Then she turned and walked out of his office without another word. Vander didn't expect that look to bother him, but it did. It stayed with him, nagging at the back of his mind as he tried to focus on emails and meetings. He glanced at the screen again. Wendy had returned to her desk, and for the first time since she started working there, she wasn't composed. She was crying. Quiet, restrained tears slid down her cheeks as she typed slowly. She wiped them quickly with a tissue, as if afraid to be seen. But he saw it, every second of it, and for the first time in years, Vander felt like the villain in his own story. His fingers curled into fists. What exactly did I gain from that? What was the point of being so harsh to a woman who has never failed me once? She had shown up every single day, done more than what was required of her, brought deals that added value to his company, saved his time, made his coffee perfectly, and worked without ever once asking for thanks. And when she finally stumbled for the first time, he had trampled over her like she was nothing. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tense. That disappointed look she gave him, calm, hurt, wordless, was more cutting than a slap. No one had ever made him feel that way, not a single soul. But she had. Why did it bother him? Why did her sadness make him uncomfortable? Why did he even care that she cried? He didn't know. All he knew was that Wendy Osiji was no ordinary woman, and somewhere in his cold, guarded heart, a crack had formed. Vander Chukanosu couldn't sit still. His office, usually a space of sharp focus and control, now felt like a cage. He stared blankly at his laptop, but his mind kept going back to that moment, Wendy's eyes filled with disappointment, and the quiet tears she tried to hide from the world. He had crossed a line. He didn't know how to say it, didn't know how to undo the damage, but he knew one thing for certain: he needed to fix it, and he needed to fix it now. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and dialed the one person who always got results, his longtime private investigator. "My assistant had a family emergency over the weekend," Vander said sharply. "I want details, everything. Get back to me now." 15 minutes later, his phone rang. He answered immediately, and the voice on the other end began, "Sir, her name is Wendy Osiji. She's 24, grew up in Surulere, only child. Her father passed away years ago. Her mother is her only family, and right now she's in the hospital. Critical condition, heart failure." Vander's brows furrowed, and he slowly sank into his chair. The man continued, "From what I gathered, it's a recurring heart infection. Long-term. Complications led to total heart failure. She needs a transplant. Her mother's on life support." Vander couldn't speak. "She's been saving up to buy a donor heart since there's been no match. The procedure and transplant will cost around 50 million naira. But sir, in every account she owns, she doesn't even have 20 million. The call ended. Silence filled the room. Vander stared at his desk, unable to comprehend the weight of the information. Wendy, all this time, fighting this battle alone? Still coming to work, still performing better than anyone he'd ever hired, never missing a deadline, never slipping, until today. How had she carried so much with so much grace? Shame settled in his chest. Real, heavy, humbling shame. Without wasting a second, he began dialing another number, his closest doctor friend. Then another, then another. He explained the situation, what he'd just learned, and what options were available. They all said the same thing. She doesn't have much time. Her mother needs a heart, immediately. The longer she waits, the less her chances, one of them said. It's risky, but if she's serious about buying a donor, then she needs to move now. That was all he needed to hear. Find me the next available heart, he instructed. I'll cover everything. I'll send the funds this evening. He ended the call, stood up, and for the first time in years, Vander Nosu stepped out of his office not as a boss, but as a man who knew he had to make things right. He walked across the office floor without a word, stopped in front of Wendy's desk, and simply said, Miss Wendy. She looked up from her laptop, surprised. Follow me? Wendy hesitated but rose slowly. She didn't ask questions. Today wasn't the day for questions. Her spirit was already stretched thin. They walked silently to the elevator. At the building's entrance, his driver was waiting, holding the door open. "Get in," Vander said softly. She was confused, deeply, but she was too drained to argue. With a sigh, she slid into the back seat. He joined her, and the car pulled off without a word. The ride was silent. She stared out the window, her mind looping with thoughts of her mother, hooked to machines, barely conscious. She had left her in her aunt's care just to come to work. The guilt was suffocating. 20 minutes later, the car pulled into the gated lot of one of Lecky's finest high-end restaurants. Wendy blinked in surprise but said nothing. They walked in, were ushered to a private booth, and sat down. Still, she didn't ask questions. She wasn't in the mood. Not today. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Whatever this was, whatever came next, she just wanted it to be over quickly. The moment they sat down in the quiet, candlelit booth of the elegant restaurant in Lecky, Wendy couldn't help but feel more confused than ever. She didn't even know how she had ended up here. One minute she was typing out a report at her desk. The next she was being driven across town by her notoriously cold boss, now seated across from her like a man trying to figure out what to say. The waiter arrived, smiling politely. Vander glanced at the menu and then at Wendy. "Order something," he said quietly. "Anything you want." Wendy blinked, clearly taken aback. She shook her head politely. "Sir, I don't have an appetite, and I have work waiting at the office. Please, why am I here?" Vander shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar terrain for him, apologizing, explaining himself. Vulnerability was a language he had never spoken fluently, but today he had to try. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the weariness in her eyes, the remnants of tears she had wiped away too quickly, and the quiet strength of a woman holding the world on her shoulders. He leaned forward, rested his hands on the table, and looked her directly in the eyes. "Wendy, I owe you an apology." She gasped softly, eyebrows rising in shock. Her lips parted slightly, stunned. Never in a million years had she expected those words to come from this man, but he didn't stop. "I've been mean, rude, unnecessarily cold, and I've never once appreciated the work you do. You've shown up every single day for this company like it was your own. I've never seen someone give so much to a place that doesn't belong to them. And yet I've overlooked it. Today, I crossed a line." His voice softened. "I judged you without knowing what you were going through. I spoke to you harshly when you were just trying to hold everything together. That's not leadership. That's cruelty. And I'm truly sorry, Wendy. I want to do better." Wendy was frozen. She could hardly breathe. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stared at the man she had worked for, feared even, now sitting in front of her, not as a boss, but as a man admitting he was wrong. All she could whisper was, "Thank you." He watched her carefully. "How come you never showed it? Never reacted? I've been terrible to you, yet you never flinched." She looked down briefly, then met his gaze. "Because I know what it means to build something from scratch," she said softly. "I've seen how hard you work, how dedicated you are, and I told myself that if I was going to be part of this team, I'd give it my all too. I wasn't going to ruin something you poured your sweat into." Vander was speechless. For a moment, all he could do was watch her. This woman with more strength than most men he knew. She wasn't just working for a paycheck. She was working with purpose. And finally, they talked about work, systems, better processes, employee morale, and even the future of the company. She spoke with such passion that he found himself watching the spark in her eyes more than he listened to her words. Her eyes lit up when she talked about problem solving and strategy. It was clear she loved her job, and for reasons he couldn't explain, that realization made him happy. They talked for nearly 2 hours, and for those 2 hours, Wendy forgot. She forgot about hospitals, about bills, about heart monitors, and the weight of uncertainty. But eventually, reality crept back in. "I should get back to the office," she said quietly, glancing at her watch. I need to pick up my things and head home. He nodded and stood up without argument. The drive back was silent but not tense. Just thoughtful. They stopped at the office. She packed her bag quietly, and he waited. Then his driver dropped her off at her flat in Surulere. As soon as she entered, Wendy rushed to the bathroom, showered quickly, changed her clothes, and grabbed her handbag. There was only one place she needed to be now: the hospital. She had seen a rare side of Vander today, but even that couldn't distract her from what truly mattered most: her mother's life. That night, Vander Chukanosu stood under the steaming water of his shower for far longer than usual. It was supposed to relax him, to wash off the heaviness of the day, but the weight in his chest stayed right there, unshakable. Later, he sat shirtless on his balcony, the cool breeze of Victoria Island brushing against his damp skin. His eyes were on the sky, but his mind was stuck in the past. It all came rushing back. His little sister, Onyinye. She was barely 13 when the heart infection started. Their parents had done everything they could, but back then, he wasn't the man he is now. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He didn't have the influence, the connections, or the money to save her. And by the time they found a donor, it was already too late. She died in his arms. Since then, he had sworn never to let anyone suffer like that around him, if he had the power to stop it. So when he found out Wendy's mother was going through the same thing, something in him shattered. He had to save her, even if that was the last thing he ever did. The next day at the office, the energy shifted. Vander was different. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't bark orders. He didn't call her for coffee 5 times in a row. Instead, he treated Wendy with a quiet calmness, a gentleness that was completely unlike him. And yet he gave her no indication that he knew about her mother's condition. He was working behind the scenes, and he wanted it to stay that way. Then Wendy walked in, radiant, glowing, like joy itself had wrapped around her. Her mom had been taken off life support that morning. She still wasn't completely healed, but for the first time in weeks, her eyes had opened. She had smiled, spoken, responded. It had taken everything in Wendy not to collapse from happiness, and it showed. Her steps were lighter, her smile brighter. Her eyes carried life again. Vander saw it all, from the CCTV camera feed in his office, and for the first time in months, he smiled without meaning to. She was beautiful, beyond the physical. There was something in the way she lit up a space, the way her presence could change the air. Vander couldn't deny it anymore. He liked her, deeply, more than he had ever planned to. As he continued to watch her, a movement in the corner of the screen caught his eye. His company's accountant, Chuka, a ridiculously good-looking guy, approached her desk. Vander turned up the audio feed. His jaw tightened. "I've been observing you for a while," Chuka said, with a charming grin. "You're hardworking, disciplined, and very, very beautiful. I'd love to take you out sometime. Maybe dinner?" Before Wendy could even part her lips to respond, the intercom on her desk buzzed loudly. "Miss Wendy, in my office, now." Startled, she rose and walked to his office, confused. She knocked and stepped in. "Yes, sir?" He didn't offer her a seat. He didn't look up from the file in his hand. "I do not condone that sort of conversation in my work environment," he said flatly. "You're here to work. Please return to your desk and stay focused." Wendy blinked. He was just, that'll be all." She paused, nodded slowly, and walked out. Quiet as always, but her brows were furrowed. Why did he seem angry? It was just a colleague. Why did he care? Lunch came, and just like the day before, he stepped out of his office and looked directly at her. "Miss Wendy, let's go." Again, she followed him. No questions, no expectations. They ended up in the same restaurant in Lekki. It was becoming a silent ritual. Just them, food, and honest conversation. And oddly, Wendy had begun to look forward to it. After the chaos of the hospital and the pain of watching her mother fade, this space, this peaceful bubble of food and quiet laughter, felt like a soft reset. They sat down. The waiter brought menus. But Vander didn't waste time. He looked her directly in the eyes and said, "I didn't like when he came talking to you." Wendy blinked, stunned. "Sorry? Why?" His gaze didn't waver. I don't like when people don't know where not to cross. You're my assistant. He should stay away. She raised a brow, confused. But he was just asking for a harmless dinner. I don't want him asking you anything, Wendy, Vander said, his voice low, firm. I don't want any man around you. A long silence settled between them. Uncomfortable. Unspoken. Loaded. Wendy stared at him, heart thudding as her mind tried to catch up with his words. What exactly was he saying? Why did he say it like that? Why did it sound like a confession, wrapped in control? She lowered her eyes and said nothing, and for the first time, she couldn't tell if this was still just work. It was a calm Monday morning, and the soft hum of the air conditioning in Vander's office was the only sound around him. He was buried deep in the final touches of a company report when his phone lit up. The caller ID made him sit upright immediately. Dr. Idris, one of the specialists he had contacted weeks ago about a donor heart. His heart thudded in his chest as he answered. We found a match, Dr. Idris said without hesitation. A heart just became available, and it's already en route to the hospital. Surgery can begin as soon as possible. Vander's lips parted in disbelief, and slowly a rare smile spread across his face. A deep, genuine smile. This was it, the day he had been praying for. He didn't hesitate. Within minutes, he authorized the full payment, 50 million naira plus aftercare medications and round-the-clock attention. Everything Wendy's mother would need for a full recovery. He didn't want her lacking anything. He didn't want Wendy hurting anymore. Just minutes later, across the office floor, a loud, joyful cry escaped from Wendy Oseji's office. She had just gotten a call from the hospital. An anonymous donor had paid for everything, the heart, the surgery, the aftercare. She couldn't hold it in. Tears flowed freely as she stood up and ran down the hallway. She burst into Vander's office, breathless, her cheeks wet. Sir, I need to go. I just got a call. My mom's surgery is happening today. I need to be there. It's an emergency. Vander only nodded, his expression calm, controlled. Go, he said gently, already knowing. She didn't question it. She turned and ran out, hailing a taxi and racing to the hospital with her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, her aunt greeted her at the hospital entrance, and together they rushed to her mother's ward. Her mom, frail but smiling, lay there with a peaceful look on her face. God has done it, her mother said, her voice soft and trembling. You did this, didn't you, my daughter? But Wendy shook her head, wiping her eyes. No, Mom, I didn't. I don't know who did, but they did, and they've given us a second chance. The surgery began shortly after she signed the consent forms. It was long, almost 12 hours. But by God's mercy, her mother made it through. The doctors assured her everything went perfectly. Wendy was overjoyed, overflowing with gratitude. But she couldn't rest until she found out who had changed her life. She approached the doctor quietly after checking on her mom. Please, she said, voice pleading, I need to know who did this for us. I need to say thank you. At first he refused. The donor requested to remain anonymous, but she begged, eyes filled with desperation. Finally he sighed and said, It was Mr. Vander Nuosu. Everything clicked, his gentleness, his apology, his sudden change. She stood in the hospital corridor, stunned. Then she smiled through her tears. Without wasting time, she placed her mother in the care of her aunt, flagged down a taxi and gave the driver an address she had memorized long ago, Vander's home in Victoria Island. When she arrived, it was already past 9 p.m. She stood at the gate, heart in her throat, until the gateman received a call from Vander himself. Let her in. He had seen her from the cameras, and for a moment, he just stood in his living room, shirt unbuttoned, heart racing, waiting. Then the door opened, and before he could say a word, Wendy rushed in, wrapped her arms around him tightly, and kissed him, deep, warm, hungry, and grateful. Vander froze at first, then gave in, returning the kiss with a depth he didn't know he had. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, tears in her eyes, I can never thank you enough, Vander. You've made me the happiest girl alive. He stared at her, breathless. And then, Just as easily as he ordered millionaire deals every day, he said, "You can start by saying yes to marrying me." Wendy gasped, stepping back, eyes wide. "Wait, what?" "I'm serious," he said. "I don't want to date you, Wendy. I don't want to play games. I know what I want, and I want you." She laughed softly through her tears. "You don't want to date me first?" He took her hand in his. When a man knows what he wants, he doesn't waste time. She looked into his eyes, heart thudding. "Then come meet my mom tomorrow." The next morning arrived with calm skies and soft sunshine pouring through the windows of St. Francis Specialist Hospital. Wendy had barely slept a wink. Her mother was resting peacefully, the colors slowly returning to her cheeks, and it still felt like a dream, one she didn't want to wake up from. By mid-morning, Wendy had freshened up and was seated beside her mother's bed, brushing her hair gently when her phone buzzed. "I'm downstairs." The message was from Vander. She smiled, heart fluttering. "Mom, you have a guest," she said, standing up. "I'll be right back." When she returned a few minutes later, Vander walked in behind her, dressed simply in a black caftan that brought out the softness in his features. For the first time since Wendy had known him, he looked peaceful, warm. Her mother looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "So, you're the miracle man?" she said softly. Vander chuckled gently, stepping forward. "I don't know about miracle, Mom, but I'm very honored to meet you." Wendy's mom motioned for a chair. "Please sit." He did. There was a moment of quiet as Wendy watched both of them, her heart pounding in anticipation. Then her mother took a slow breath. "Thank you for everything. I don't even know where to start. You gave me my life back. You gave my daughter her smile back. That's something I can never repay." "You don't need to, Ma," Vander said humbly. "It was my honor, truly." Wendy's mother studied him for a moment, eyes sharp and wise. "I can see in your eyes that you care about her, but I want to be sure. Why are you really here, Mr. Vander?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I want to marry your daughter." Wendy's breath caught. Her mother blinked slowly, clearly taken aback. "Marry?" "Yes, Ma," Vander said with all the sincerity in his voice. "She's the most hardworking, loyal, grounded woman I've ever met. She changed my life, and she doesn't even know it. I've never been more certain of anything. I want to do this the right way. With your blessing." The room fell silent. Then her mother leaned forward slightly. "Do you love her?" she asked quietly. "With every part of me," he said without hesitation. "Will you respect her?" "I already do." "Will you protect her, even from yourself?" she added, locking eyes with him. That question hit deep. Vander nodded. "Yes, I will. She's not just the woman I love. She's the woman I want to grow with." Wendy's mother let out a long breath. Then she turned to Wendy, who stood frozen, overwhelmed with emotion. "You love him?" her mother asked. Wendy nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, Mom, I really do." Her mother turned back to Vander, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Then who am I to stand in the way of love?" She extended her hand. "You have my blessing, Mr. Vander Nosu. Take care of my daughter." Vander took her hand in his, holding it gently. "Thank you, Ma. I promise, I will." Wendy walked over and all three of them embraced in quiet joy. Two hearts healed, and one love story was finally blooming in the light. 3 months later, the church bells rang loud and clear across Lagos. It was a day no one would forget, the wedding of Vander Chukwunosu and Wendy Osiji. What had started as a boss-assistant relationship built on tension and resilience had blossomed into one of the most inspiring love stories anyone had ever witnessed. The venue? A stunning garden chapel tucked away in Ikoyi, beautifully decorated with lush white roses, delicate gold accents, and soft lighting that made the entire atmosphere feel like a dream. But nothing, absolutely nothing, shone brighter than Wendy. She walked down the aisle in a graceful off-shoulder lace gown, her hair swept up in an elegant bun, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her at the altar. She wasn't the same girl who had once cried silently behind her desk. Today she was radiant, strong, fulfilled. And sitting proudly in the front row was her mother dressed in a stunning silver lace wrapper and matching gel, alive, healthy, and glowing. Against all odds, she had recovered enough to walk again and witness the day she thought she might not live to see. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her daughter say, "I do." Vander, looking devastatingly handsome in his white tuxedo, held Wendy's hands tightly as the vows were exchanged. His heart was full. She wasn't just his wife. She was his calm, his anchor, the woman who reminded him what it meant to feel again. "I promise to love you," he whispered, "on your strong days and your weak ones. I promise to always choose you." "And I promise to stand beside you," Wendy replied, her voice steady. "In the boardroom, in the kitchen, and in life. I choose you, always." Applause erupted as the officiant declared them husband and wife. Their kiss was passionate, long, and unforgettable. In the years that followed, Vander and Wendy built not just a home, but an empire. With Wendy's sharp mind and Vander's visionary leadership, Nwosutech became one of the most powerful tech companies on the continent, raking in multi-billion naira contracts and international acclaim. They expanded across Africa, launched mentorship programs for women in tech, and employed thousands. They didn't just build wealth, they built legacy. Wendy remained his assistant for years, by choice. Not because she had to, but because she loved building something with him from ground up. And eventually, she became the co-CEO, his equal in every sense. Every anniversary, Vander still told her, "You changed my life, Wendy." And every time she smiled and whispered, "You gave me one." Her mother lived long enough to see her grandchildren. Their home was always filled with laughter, warmth, and peace. What started as a harsh, emotionless workplace became the foundation for a love story that defied expectations. Two broken people, one powerful connection, and a love that healed them both, from boss to husband, from assistant to life partner, forever. 5 years later, the Nwosu mansion stood tall and elegant in the heart of Victoria Island, now more than just a home. It was a sanctuary, a place where dreams were birthed, love lived freely, and peace reigned. The sun filtered through the white curtains in their bedroom as Wendy stirred, her eyes fluttering open to the soft giggles of her children. Zena, now 4, was hopping beside her on the bed, wearing her dad's oversized glasses. Beside her was little Liam holding a plastic tablet and babbling about meetings. Wendy smiled and pulled them both into her arms, kissing their foreheads. "Where's Daddy?" "In the garden," Zena whispered, as if it were a secret. Wendy walked out in a soft silk robe and found Vander barefoot in the garden, watering a bed of fresh roses he had planted in her honor. When he saw her, his face lit up, still just as smitten as the first day he realized he loved her. "Good morning, CEO of my heart," he teased. "Good morning, COO of my soul," she shot back laughing. They had built something far beyond business. Together they had launched a tech scholarship foundation for women in underrepresented communities, named it after Wendy's mother, and invested in hospitals to make transplants more accessible. It became their life mission. Their company, Nwosutech International, had just been featured on Forbes Africa as one of the top 10 most influential African tech empires, led by a couple who turned power into purpose. But to Wendy and Vander, the real success was this: a healed heart, a healthy family, a quiet love that roared louder every day. As the sun rose over Lagos, Vander pulled Wendy close, their kids running around them, laughter echoing through the walls of a home built on grace, pain, loyalty, and love. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Thank you for staying when I was hard to love." And she replied, "Thank you for choosing me," over and over again. The end.